Hello everyone, welcome. The stream should be up. I know I'm starting a little bit late than what was advertised, but first, just welcome everyone. I'm Brian Cromery, lead designer of Second Edition. Joining me today is, I don't know if he wants to go by his Discord name or not, so I'll let him introduce himself. So he's kind of the one that I've hyped up, and I think he showed up in our 2v2 showcase. If you happen to miss that, he had a great game against the BCG team. He was basically one of the probably one of the key playtesters when it came to balance, I would say, and a lot of decisions with feedback and just a lot of impactful feedback and criticism. So great to have him here today with us. With that said, I'll still wait a few minutes. Can't actually hear him. I don't know why that would be. Should be able to hear you. Should keep talking. Let me fix maybe because you're not coming in this. Well, we can still stream while we figure this out. It's not the end of the world. I'm not sure why that bar is not going up. My mic's going up. Good thing we didn't go right into those discussions and not have you talk the whole time. That would have been bad. So, folks, as we get this squared away, we will be doing basically a designer showcase, and then we're going to follow it. Now sound for all of us? Or maybe because that was the... because I just had this starting soon. Although I don't see a second bar going up when he talks. Let me turn on the sound of it. Going up. I don't think it's anything on your end. Into those discussions and not have you talk the whole time. Okay, so if I mute it on... Interesting. Is it because it's on a different sound device? Well, you, not him still. Try talking now. No, the bar's still not moving. Let me oh no, I can't really. I don't want to. I shouldn't have to cancel the cast. Let me try to figure out what it could be. Fantastic. I'm just gonna put you to headphones right now, maybe? Alright, try talking now. Let me try putting that to headphones. I'll try it.
Hello? Testing.
Yes, there we go.
Okay.
Alright, I see you moving
Perfect.
in OBS. Hopefully the chat can confirm. Just say a little bit more.
Hi, this is Taylor Stenjum. I'm known as Applesauce Hat on the Company of Heroes Discord. Please feel free to reach out to me about any questions you might have about strategy or faction balance, because I have argued to death with Brian over it many times.
So he was the biggest critic. Do we want a little bit more of you? We're cutting you off at your chin right now. Is that something you could slightly lower? Do you need me to adjust?
Yeah,
There we go. All right, so welcome everyone. Sorry for the delay. We are just working on the format. So the format is going to be a little bit different on this one. What we're going to be doing here is first I want to lower my volume. I think I've been loud previous cast. So what I want to start with today is first we're going to go over some open chat design discussion. See some people in the chat joining us, so feel free to ask whatever you want. We are going to be discussing probably going a little bit detail of the different design decisions along the way. That's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. And then afterward, what we're going to do is immediately after, I'm going to make, with Taylor here, five 5-minute videos of all the factions. giving that 5-minute overview that people are looking for. And that's going to be a separate video, so you'll have to like refresh the channel. I'm not even going to send the links because I just want to kind of try to bang them out as fast as possible. So if you're not able to get in the chat, that's it is what it is. I'm just going to live stream them, or people could just wait until later. If you just want to say goodbye after we're done with this part of it, and then just catch them later. But the whole point is really to just give 5 minutes. Faction, just keep moving. We're just going to stop it, start the next one, start it, stop. And with that said, we can start to get in the discussion of, I guess, open chat. Feel free. Any questions you have, great. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. Again, this is Taylor joining us. Applesauce Hat, as he is in Discord. He was kind of the ringer, if you will, in that 2v2. Spoilers a little bit. Basically leading the playtesting team against the VCG team. And my daughter is showing me off some delicious pizza that my wife just made. So, with that said, we can get over the design. So, we took a lot of feedback. So, I guess we'll start from there a little bit from first edition. Hello, Walter, Fixer, Sinner, Bassman, Rapid, Cancel. Awesome. We also got Martin. Whoever else, for a few others that are hopefully joining in. So I'm going to start a little bit over the design discussion as to from pretty much somewhat historical, or like somewhat in time frame. Like man, what's that word when you do things in chronological order? There we go. So something in kind of chronological order. What was the focus? A little bit more obviously from a design perspective. Hopefully, if you have any kind of publisher questions that were more about components or rules or not really what's necessary. I mean, if you have anything, I'll try to answer if I can. Some of the questions are, could be Chris questions, and I may just have to defer if they're like very particular with something like that regard. But I'm just going to try to go focus more on the designer questions here, if that's okay with everyone. But yeah, if you have any faction questions, anything like that, ask them now. Don't even if it's something that I'm going to cover in the faction overview, don't hesitate. I'll cover it now, and then the faction 5-minute overview probably is not gonna. It's just gonna be kind of bullet points. Kind of, we're just gonna go over quick like that light overview that's on the Kickstarter page. Taylor's got his one that he kind of has prepared that I asked him to do. So probably a little bit better than mine. Mine's more of like a marketing angle. I think his is more of like a faction overview, if you will. And somehow we're going to try to get this in 5 minutes. I don't know. Because then we're going to try to say the opening play of a faction, if that makes sense. Like the opening strategy. Then we're going to get into strengths and weaknesses. Somehow all in 5 minutes. I don't know how that's going to happen. But with that said,
we'll try to. We'll
try our best. I have 5-minute timers. If we go if we go a little bit over, we might go a little bit over. I'm not gonna just cut it if we have something else to say, but I don't want it to go 10. Let's put it that way. I'll have like a 5-minute bonus timer. I definitely don't want it to go 10. Maybe I'll set that to 3 minutes, and we'll be able to reset that. So, they'll definitely be under 8 minutes each. I think that's fair. We'll aim for 5, but a bonus 3 that we can reset after each one. Alright, so I don't see any questions yet, so I'll just kind of go into it. So, essentially, I don't want to get too much into my backstory, but just kind of go on. Like, I was basically very, very light. That I was kind of pulled onto the team after first edition due to critical feedback. Chris just found that a lot of what suggestions that kind of the community was, I would say I was kind of one of the lead critics at the time. In particular, high explosive damage in first edition printed. And so that was kind of the first issue that got me on the team. So we basically, what happened in first edition was they were trying to tune it. HE wasn't getting used that much. And then, I think at the end, there was perhaps a few changes, so that's why I think a lot of people say, was there enough balance? Was there not enough testing? I think it was something where there was a change made specifically in the high explosive category where that last, I don't want to say last second rule change, but I'm just going to call it that for lack of a better term, for high explosive to try to tune it up, I think was a little bit overboard. So that was kind of the main issue that I brought forward first. And then we moved on to, I kind of then started faction rebalancing. A lot of it was with heavy input from Chris at that point. He just gave me we just kind of bounced ideas back and forth, and at that point, that was actually before I joined the team, and then I joined the team, and then I started actually going through. We had for a while we had a lot of almost weekly meetings, kind of going over what targets we were trying to do. We are obviously trying to fix multiple issues from multiple different angles. The key ones that we were focused on was the victory point issue. I kind of brought that one up early. Basically, we tried to get more victory points on the map. We tried to fix the experience issue, which was kind of a severe issue. So we have it so it's 1 XP per round plus 1 for each and every enemy you target. That was kind of a very open, collaborative effort on the Discord. That one was probably the most impact issue or the most kind of open community actively going on. We did that for a few weeks, and then we were testing them out. We had multiple suggestions. Those who weren't there, just unaware, and so that was kind of critical to getting essentially things balanced from a base, because you kind of need a strong base with the XP system. And then finally, I had the kind of the XP thing as we were kind of going to that. Like, obviously, the biggest concern was we're gonna have too much XP, right? And well, I think I was like, yeah, that's fine because we want to get commanders finished, right? So that was kind of the critical decision. We're like, okay, well, the focus is to get commanders completed, ideally every single match. It shouldn't be an if, but should be a when. So to make that happen, we have the commander system with a lot of experience, and then you still have enough experience where it's not like you sometimes can get everything, but it really depends on your play style. So if you're like playing very defensive, you're still not going to be flooded with experience, but if you get a lot of units spreading across a lot of targets, if you get some splash upgrades, you're going to have a lot more experience you find in this game. All right. With that said, so that was XP. That was kind of the rundown, the short and sweet, if you will, of XP. The unit balance, I'll just say this now, that way it's out of the way. It was about like 5 or 6 major iterations, where a few of them first before even we made a print and play available, but then we made a print and play available. So there was just a lot of feedback from the community that we're printing things out. The concern there was every time I did a print and play, everyone's like, I don't want to print it if this isn't the final version. So it was kind of like a tough one where I think people were expecting like, can you just fix my first edition so it's playable? And at first we kind of, as a side note, I don't want to touch on too long, but we kind of were trying this 1.5 thing. We're like, okay, well, some of these second edition rules can kind of work with your first edition. And then we said, no, listen, it's either all or nothing. You can't take first edition units and use this other system. It just became this wavy line where you took some things but not others. And yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're testing things and home brewing and trying to have fun, of course, we wanted you to have the best version possible. So kind of Chris kind of took the lead on what was called 1.0 final, and he kind of ran with that and got that out, kind of that last errata. So whoever has what's called the second wave from Europe, they should have that updated rulebook that's 1.0 final. It's also on the website, so if you still have first edition and you're playing the game and trying to have fun, you could get the latest there if you were kind of got your, especially like all the U.S. backers, rest of the world backers, just really anyone that wasn't anyone that was second wave Europe or just received their game probably this calendar year. So that was the key thing. It's XP, the resource points. So that was kind of also with the victory point capture points. So that was just a focus on just having. What we were finding is that once I capture a point, I could just kind of back my troops up, focus fire on that point, and then there just wasn't enough points where that was just such a strong strategy that it was very hard for enemies to capture. And for those watching, that's kind of why I strongly, strongly recommend for 2v2s you play on 3 panels. You can play on 2 panels now that there's more victory points and everything, but it's still like a little tight where you're going to run into issues sometimes. Like when you're downsizing a map size, you're much more likely to run into scenarios where you're going to throw a unit on a victory point capture point late game, and it's just going to get blown up. So your best bet is to neutralize. So there's just things like that that's kind of why we kind of really recommend the bigger maps for player counts. And that's why, that's only part of the reason why I had a couple questions in the Kickstarter about one panel maps. One panel maps didn't work in first edition, to be honest. And I kind of just, I don't want to say discontinued them, but, they're really for demoing. You can't really have a competitive game on them. There's just not enough room to move around. If you want to test out units, go a few rounds into the game, sure, feel free. We're not going to really update those just because there's not really much that can be done with them. So that's just kind of a side note for those interested in that. So really, the default for 1v1 is 2v2. Two panels for 1v1, 3 panels for 2v2, and 3v3s and 4v4s. Once you get to the 4 panels, it's mostly fine. I mean, you could possibly argue you want to go to 5 panels, but who's ever going to fit that on a table? So it kind of becomes silly. So I'll let Taylor kind of come in now and say what he was important to him, because he was kind of in and out through a lot of this process. So he's just someone that I want to give a lot of. He's kind of more subtle in that I wouldn't really pinpoint one thing and say that was him. Like, for instance, there was a couple backers who I don't know if I want they want me to say their names, but they know who they are. Where they were a pair that were testing regularly, and they came up with, for instance, the firing arc change, which was a big fix. And then later on, they had the neutralization idea, which we had assault, but we didn't have neutralization until much later. So neutralization was it's very critical to the video game, and I mean, to be honest, it was just not an idea that we really thought of. So the neutralization was basically there now. Like, once I saw it, I was like, wow, this is a no-brainer. We're going to definitely have that in. Because there was an issue still, like, kind of the one I touched on, where if you can't, your unit's going to die, there was really no point to send it in. So now, with requiring an assault or a pin to kind of prevent the neutralization, so basically you move your unit on the spot, if they actively assault you and then destroy your unit before the supply phase, then you don't even get to neutralize or capture. So, alright, question from the chat. Maybe include if there's a particular map feature, if there's a strength or a weakness for a faction. That's definitely not going to fit in the 5 minutes, but I can kind of go over that now, if you want to hear that stuff now. Definitely, this is the whole point of this stream. So if you have any faction questions, I'll answer them now. And then the 5 minutes are going to be kind of that quick, dirty, very efficient, focusing on that 5 minutes if we can hit it. So, yeah, I mean, I guess we can kind of go into that. Well, let's do Taylor's thing, and then we'll go into the faction thing. Kind of go into what...
Yeah, let me add into what you just went on to for about 10, 15 minutes on.
Mm-hmm.
So... First edition's transitions to second edition was a large part of input from the community. It wasn't just Brian, and it wasn't just people at Bad Pro Games. It was a lot of different passions from people that really enjoyed the game in the community, and we would have suggestions in which we would end up talking a lot on the Discord. We would have 100+ messages a day of just people going back and forth on how a certain suggestion would change the game, the pros, the cons, the benefits. I don't even think Brian covered 1/10 of all the changes and discussions that were happening on the Discord, all the things that didn't make it in, all the things that did happen. I did play a large part in a lot of the changes. Some of them are more subtle. Some of them were kind of big and impactful. Some of them were just helping to develop other people's ideas that they would have, like, hey, I want to do this. I'm like, okay, well, let's try and figure out how that's going to change the game and whether that's going to be a positive or negative impact, as well as balance, and me finding different issues of, like, hey, they have this weird opening strategy with US that just kind of is broken, so how can we either halt that strategy or fix the map or fix certain things? But mostly it was just a large part of the community that kind of caused second edition to happen. It probably wouldn't be here today without Brian, because Brian was the one that people would make a suggestion and Chris would somewhat ignore us, and then Brian would be like, no, I'm going to bring this up every single day this entire week until Chris acknowledges that this is actually something that should be changed. So Brian was probably the most the biggest advocate for the community. Everyone else would make a suggestion and they try and work on it, but then Brian would try and push it to go even further. So big thanks to Brian. Big thanks to all of the playtesters that actually added to taking the game. Even if they had negative feedback, it was still positive to know about it and to understand why they had that interaction in the game, why they had that feeling, and it kind of led to what we have today. So,
Certainly.
yeah, if you go through the history of the second edition Discord, I don't know if we've wiped some of the older stuff, but it's probably years of back and forth conversations on balance and different units, different mechanics, different things that could be changed, things that have been brought up multiple times over and over again. But yeah, it's in a state now where I think that it is going to give you a positive experience every time you play it, and it shouldn't get old. It shouldn't make you feel like, oh, this game's unbalanced and there's no way that, like, oh, I'm just going to do this every single game, I'm going to win. You should be able to figure out how you can play around the map, play around your opponent,
Yeah.
play to a certain faction's strength, and use different commandos that will try and change how you play your favorite faction.
I just the one thing that I have trouble emphasizing enough. It's at the beginning of the rulebook. Normally, you want the victory conditions at the beginning of the rulebook. It's there, and somehow it's still. I don't know if these people aren't necessarily too familiar with the video game. Again, they don't need to be. It's right there at the beginning of the rulebook. The biggest issue that I find when you're going to have big disparity in scores is that people are not focusing on victory point capture points. And
Yes.
it's there, it's at the beginning, it's emphasized saying if you do not do this, you will probably lose. It's in other words, maybe even those words maybe would help. I don't know. But if you're teaching, if you're here watching this, if you ever see this video and you're teaching to someone else, hammer away at that. Not only say it first, but say it last. I don't know, because that's going to cause issues. People, like, if you don't capture victory points and your opponent does, you're going to end up with a 21-3 score or something, and there's really nothing that can be done with the game. You have to capture the victory points. Like, so that's kind of the biggest issue that I still see from time to time. I mean, especially new players, even in the tournament we were seeing, where players aren't going out to the sides to capture the victory point. Like we started with Moro River, as I have on the screen here. So I do want to just touch on that first. Probably anyone that ever sees this video could help. Like, you need to have a plan for capturing victory points. So when you're coming in the game, manpower is probably right there as like number 1 and 2. The other ones aren't as critical. So fuel is critical if you want to get vehicles, but infantry win games. That's kind of the point of this game. So you can almost completely ignore enemy vehicles. You don't have to destroy them. You just have to capture victory points and manpower spots, and you're gonna at least be competitive. It's gonna be a close game. So always keep that in mind. Those are the ones you want to defend, the manpower ones and the victory point ones. That's it. So munitions are kind of like the most auxiliary resource, and fuel is just a timer for unlocking your tier buildings and obviously getting out your heavy tanks. Heavy tanks have more damage, but since they can't capture, they have a different role. They're kind of the damage dealers. The infantry are what wins the game and loses the game. So, yeah, 5 minutes is going to fly by. So, yeah, let's start now. Go ahead.
I wanted to add to that because you said that the victory point's the most important thing on the map. At the start of the game, new players, experienced players, all players should definitely look at the map and try to identify where is their strong side. Where can they easily hoard 3 victory points? Because usually the average is 6. And so as long as you can hoard 3, you're not losing. So if you can figure out where you can easily hoard 3 victory points and try and hoard that down and secure it, and then try to identify where is the weak spot in your opponent to take the 4th one. Because if you just go in and you're not really have a plan, you'll end up finding that your opponent's just taking everything from you. You're trying to target your opponent's strong side, and that's just causing you to lose the game because you're spending more command points to try and get over there. You're spending more resources to try and put more units on a side of the board that you are not strong at. So try to identify, look at the map, see where was it strong for your faction on your side of the map, and try and hoard at least 3 points.
So with that
If you
said,
really want to, yeah,
with
go
that
ahead.
said, I'm going to show you Morrow River here, because Morrow River is the new starter map, if you will. So it almost works. I feel like it's very close to having players understand it. Again, some players in the tournament, for instance, didn't quite get it, but it's very easy on this map to understand, okay, this one's easy. I'm going to have an advantage going right and capturing this one. I'm going to have an advantage going left and capturing this one, okay? There
Yeah.
is This map is also designed to be a very high skill ceiling as well. So that's why it's like, okay, yeah, the victory point's not 3 away, it is 5 away, right? But it is kind of tough where you kind of you have to choose for most factions other than Soviets, which, you're going to probably capture these two, or you can capture this one, right? So you have that choice where the Soviets can kind of capture all three of these, but other than that, you kind of have freedom where, hey, look, do I want to run this third one up over here so I can capture this? Or you got to be planning ahead. Do I want to get a transport vehicle that I'm going to have an infantry with the transport vehicle come capture this? So that's kind of the game plan that I would say. Do either of you have a change that you hoped would make it in a second edition but didn't make the cut? Honestly, there's a few for me. I'd say the first one is I didn't really want to push it, but I really think buildings should have even less health. We went from 4 to 3. I think it should be 2. Especially because we're going to be testing a destroyed building change. So now, basically, none of these buildings are the right version, but there's the destroyed buildings. That I do want. I can kind of go over that now. Something that we're going to be testing is destroyed buildings. Once a building's destroyed, you're now going to be able to enter it with infantry. That's what we're going to be able to test. And then you only get 1 defense die, so very much like light cover. However, it does give you immunity to MGs. So, it's kind of something where we're trying to find a cool little middle ground. That way, infantry can walk through destroyed buildings. That's kind of one of the side benefits of that. But my thing is, if buildings went from 3 health down to 2, I like destroyed buildings. Now that destroyed buildings change and is in a good spot, I feel that mechanic can be used more. Because I really like the destructible stuff. I know a lot of people, we're getting some feedback from some people, I should say, that, oh, hey, I don't want too much fiddliness, too much clutter. I don't feel like the 3D terrain is clutter or fiddly, in my opinion. Your infantry trays just slide right into the top of these buildings. It's very much plug and play. So having to swap them out and then having that still usable and interesting and tactical, I think is a cool idea. Because a lot of people have Train Pack 2. Train Pack 2, to be honest, is kind of one of our more niche products. But this will help put it and highlight where, yeah, you could just destroy it, and then if you destroyed it, then you don't have Train Pack 2, you can just go there. And obviously, if you don't have if you have Train Pack 1, it's easy to see. It's such a huge percentage of our first edition backers that had Train Pack 1. But that's kind of something that just we want to test. There's some other changes for what we're calling 2.04 that we want to test. Just removing restrictions on transports and vehicles in general, and building emplacements and repairing, all that stuff, except for red lines. So we're going to leave in the red line restriction because that's really the only point of red lines, to prevent movement and kind of create that blockage. So that's what we're going to be testing. So you can even spawn in transports. That one I think is, regardless if we do the whole plethora, if you will, of all those other ideas, that one I think is going to make it in. Just because that's probably the 2 things that I can't hammer home enough to players is capture victory points, and number 2 is make transports and use them. Transports are just the one. I'll just openly admit the CP system is the defining feature of this game. Its one weakness is that each unit can only move 3 per round. It's kind of the cool thing, but it's also the bad thing because there's just not enough rounds where it just can't keep timing pace comparatively to the video game, right? Because you could just send out all your infantry, and then the CP system's kind of like how you're managing your own units. which is I think I think that was Chris's like awesome idea that he had here. I think it was an extension from his mech command system. Now that I have played it, I did get a copy. That's what that was trying to do. So I think the cube system was just the evolution of that. And it was a really cool idea. But that was mine. Do you have one, Taylor? You probably have like a list of 10 because I was pretty, resistant to all your ideas. So
I have a lot of different changes. I mean, my big one was some of the heavy vehicle costs, but I've given up trying to convince you on some of these. I even forget about them. It's like, oh, the game's as good as I can convince Brian to change it to at this point. But not really too many big controversial things because I was mostly an advocate for simplicity, trying to make it so that way I could teach this game to someone who, like, if I had 3 new players, how can I teach this game without making it too complex so that way they can understand how to play the game without me needing to teach them the rules or making it feel like I'm having an overwhelming victory just because they don't understand the rules. So I think I tried to convince them to make it as simple as possible, hopefully. But everyone always has more suggestions, like these building change that Brian was going into, and I do have some concerns with that, but we won't discuss that on stream. I'll add my own pros and cons because I do see pros, but I do see some cons. But that's
right.
kind of where my value came from. Was I'm not against change, but I was always trying to provide information of like, here's how this is going to impact the game. But yeah, so I think I've gotten most of what I've wanted. I probably have not, but I've repressed some of our conversations of me trying to convince you. But
Yeah,
I
I mean,
think I think the game's in a good state.
I think his biggest contribution is I would do a big change of all the units. Kind of when we got enough feedback, I'd be like, okay, yeah, I'd watch a lot of games, right? So that was kind of what people called me the voyeur or whatever. So I would watch a lot of games. Like I would always, anytime anyone was playing in Discord, I would always try to, on TTS, I'd watch. I would actually prefer. The problem is like if you did the print and play, like what I kind of needed was it was kind of it was too demanding to be fair. So
Yeah,
like the problem is like the print and play was cool and all, but like when someone said, "Oh, this unit's too strong or too weak," there's just so many factors, right? Like obviously there's the new game experience that I'm trying to balance and always keep an eye out for. And obviously there's other issues like internal metas. Like if you always play with the same group of people, you're gonna just naturally have tendencies to think something stronger than other people, than perhaps other groups. So that's just gonna happen. But the key thing that I wanted a lot, right? So I needed like a screenshot of the board at the beginning of the turn. I needed a screenshot of where they were before the supply phase, or basically after the damage phase, or maybe even before. Like the problem was there was like I needed 3 screenshots, or technically 2 after that. I needed basically the damage phase, and then after your new purchases. I think that just those 2 would do it. So just so that I could see
yeah,
where things were, what choices people made in terms of what they spawned on the board. Because like if you're complaining about mortar teams, right, and you're not making units that counter mortar teams, then you can't complain to me that mortar teams are too strong. That's kind of just something that I'm going to be like, well, did you make this unit? And you say no, and then I'm going to jot that down in my head. Okay, well, they're not making the counter unit. And I don't want to ask them like, hey, do you know this is a counter unit? But sometimes I do. Like, hey, do you know this is a unit for that? And they're like, oh, I don't want to go that. Or it's usually transports. To be honest, transports solve a lot of problems in this game. Um, but I mean, maybe they're not fun. Maybe again, that's kind of a part. That's partly the system's fault. But the problem is I kind of came in as a developer role, whereas like the system, I didn't want to like chuck out everything and build it from scratch. So I did have to work with what was given, right? So like transports are kind of the band-aid to a lot of issues, unfortunately. So and that's kind of the biggest one. If you need to get 6 hexes in a round, transport. Like if you need to go dive on an enemy mortar, transport. So there's just kind of a lot of things where transports, just kind of solve that issue. It is what it is. Like so, there's just kind of that how it just turns out. But yeah, I mean, just unit balance. I would come up with a a framework, and then I would kind of tweak almost all the units in the game, just seeing everything. Some were kind of outliers that would get tweaked more. Some of them are very similar to how they were in first edition. Like the Greyhound didn't change until pretty much near the end. It was kind of because it was in like a cool spot where it was just always seeing use. So the big thing with sometimes you have to like, now as a you kind of like it's one thing I want to say is that when you don't see a unit played, it's very hard to balance it. So sometimes you have to like over buff things and then tune it back. I think that's probably why a lot of video game designers do that with kind of the new hot item in like with games, because if it's not used, you're not going to collect data on it. You're going to get zero data. So it's something where, okay, well, this isn't getting used. We got to tune it up. We got to tune it up. So that's kind of what, like, the perfect example of that is AT guns. Like, internally, there was a lot of pushback when I was like, okay, we gotta buff these AT guns. They're not getting used. They're still not getting used. They're not getting used. And it was like, how do we get them used? So one thing like I lost out on early was coming from first edition. We were testing free pack up, and I was kind of on board with that. And then the team kind of said, no, we're not doing that. So I thought it was fine. Like I kind of just like, yeah, that was one of the ones I accepted. But I was like, because weapon teams kind of have their own issues. Like for instance, Taylor doesn't recommend ever getting over 2. So
for your first game, I recommend trying to only getting a max of 2 weapon teams, so that way you can at least keep aggression on the board. But I'll let you keep going, Brian, because you seem to be on. I think you had one topic at the beginning of this, and then we got into unit balance. So
yes,
I'm really worried we're going to stick to 5 minutes here in the future.
Well, I will set timers for that one. I don't have any timers now because it's just open chat for now. Is the mat updated? Looks much sharper for some reason. This is the latest that I have worked on. Again, this is pretty much. I am not the best artist, but this is what I really worked on. A lot, Rudy, right there in the chat. It was one of the biggest critics. I had this one artistic style that wasn't crisp. I'll admit it. I'm not an artist. I'm a designer developer. Problem is nowadays people expect designers to do everything, so it's a little bit tough. But I was really trying to get artwork just matching the design of the map, if that makes sense. Like obviously I put this destroyed tank here so that it could, it was one cool thing that we had in World Builder Pack First Edition that was like a cool tile. I'm like, oh, how could I integrate that? And I wanted kind of these like choke points and things, so just tough movement spots. So like one thing was like, oh, like buildings were too tight, so I had to like basically widen this bridge up here, and this kind of pathway across the water is just kind of just a lot of it is passable. It's not all impassable terrain, basically with the red lines. So this map alone went through like 6+ iterations of, okay, here's the update, play test it for a week or 2 weeks, and then all right, what's working, what's not, just watching so many games of it played. Because this map had a lot of just high standards. I may have already talked about that in another video, but this map just had really high standards. So there was that. But yeah, I mean, going back to the kind of the chronological order there, if you will. Basically, then after the XP system, we had Assault. That was kind of like right after it. And that was to really fix the issue of... That's kind of at the same time almost. I can listen to Brian ramble. Thanks. At least someone can. Again, ask any questions. I'll give you an earful, as my wife always says. So the design there with Assault was they're just, again, it really comes down to there's like the flaws of the game. It's just really trying to alleviate them, if that makes sense. There is only 6 to 10 rounds in the game. So the biggest thing that limits is just number of turns to move your units and number of turns to move your units. So like that's kind of the biggest restriction to the entire game. So that's why like if you get your tank out the last round, it doesn't usually even have an impact. So we had to move it up. We had to make more resources on the maps. I know Taylor's like, well, can some maps be low resources? I'm like, no. The reason why is because someone plays that map, has a bad experience, and says the game's crap. And I don't disagree with that, because the problem is to play low resources is fun. Some people like that. I know Taylor likes it. I know I enjoy it from time to time. But the problem is, like, if I don't make every map like up to a certain standard and ease of play, like ease of play is very important. So if I make some maps, like I can put notes in there, don't play this map if you want to get tanks, and people will still play that map. They'll not get tanks, and they'll be like, "Why did I get tanks? This is just like first edition." So it's just hard, right? Because you want people to playtest the map, and then like nobody will playtest the map because there's no resources on it, and they're like, "Oh, this map's horrible." So maybe Taylor would have loved it, but
Well, I had other ways of dealing with lower resources, and it wasn't necessarily about the tanks. And every commando now has free call-ins. I think that was a big balance that we did.
That was
each commando having at least 2 free call-ins.
Yeah, that was actually a big one. I tried to keep balancing the commanders, balancing the faction boards. The faction boards I had in a pretty good spot. Taylor was actually instrumental in very late, like once after like iteration 4 or 4 or 5, somewhere around there. He was very instrumental with finding out like this faction, just these units aren't real easy to play. Like one of them was the T-34. The T-34 was kind of left alone for a long time, and the justification was it was just so cheap. So it was kind of just because it was so cheap, what could you do with it? Because it was just so versatile. You did have to know how to use it though. So yeah, will the resource tokens be in second edition? Yes, in the update kit and second edition, all the triangles now will be two-sided, and almost all of them have like a split on the back side where it shows 2. So you're probably going to be using the back side more than the front side, because as you can see on this map, every single resource point is a dual resource. As you get to higher, what's cool about this system is it actually works very well at the higher map counts, because once you get to the higher map counts, then you can have a lot more single resources because there's more flags on the map. So we did find 12 was kind of that sweet spot. Some maps have a little bit lower at 2 panels, and then the same thing where 18 capture points at 3 panels. But you kind of need more capture points. There's just a lot of things. Like I hate it. Like I hate to see it in the Kickstarter comments. Like I hate to be like, yeah, you guys, you need more flags. If you have a train pack 1, I'm really sorry, but what we're happening, and if we only have 12 capture points in basically those larger player count games like 2v2s, 3v3s, 4v4s, and those bigger maps, is people don't have anything to do. They have like 1 capture point on their panel, and they either have it or they don't, and there's nothing interesting going on over there. So like I feel that as a designer, fixing the game in some ways, because you really need the board to play well. Can you go across the river in the hex to the bottom right of the manpower or fuel point of the right of the map? So zooming in here, no. So what this is this is kind of like a little water wheel here with a little bit of island. I think you're talking about this one. I hope you're talking about this one. But there's a red line here. So the new system, that was actually one of the very last changes, was to I was hearing comments over time. I'm like, is there any idea I can come up with of how to help colorblind people? People that are having issues with the yellow-green or the the green-red, whatever combinations they were having trouble with. So I came up with this little dot and dash system to help those people. But that's, if you see that now in this second edition, that was inspired. Try to help those people basically as best as I could. I didn't want to put it like you don't see it here. I didn't want to spam it because I didn't want to take too much away from the artistic feel of the map. Because it was just kind of looking like dots and dashes everywhere, I felt. So I didn't want to overdo it. But it is what it is. But if you're talking about this one, go across the map next to the bottom right of the manpower and fuel on the right of the map. I assume you're talking about this one. And no, because there's a red here, a red here, a red here. So after you capture this point, you can go down. I should probably pick a different color. Let me change to purple now. But no, so once you capture that spot, you have to go back down and then to cross. So hopefully that is the question. If not, try again. I'll try to, understand. Talking about the one to the right bottom of that one. Are you talking about the munitions fuel? Yeah, so this munitions fuel, yep, this is basically maps with Morse code. Yeah, nice comment, Rudy. So yeah, this one here, the munitions fuel. Yes, you can cross the river here. This is kind of that wide crossing. Yeah, you see a little bit graphical water, but it's shallow, right? So that was kind of the concept of this whole thing was this is shallow water. That's why it's easy to cross. Just knee deep water, if you will, or whatever that tanks could just roll through, and infantry can obviously just kind of go up to their waist. That kind of thing, basically. So there's that. Hopefully that answers your question. But yeah, I mean that's why the flag thing is there. I don't think it's just unfortunate. That's kind of why I pushed Chris. I'm like, we got to do something about these flags. We got to do something about these flags. So that's why we got that mini flag pack. For those that just had one train pack one, you don't have to get another train pack one just to play a 2v2. I thought that was way too much to ask of people. So that's kind of why we have so many products, and it is unfortunate, but it is taking a first edition, trying to do what we can wherever we can. That's kind of why we're trying to push. That's why I'm pushing the destroyed buildings idea, is because there's some maps where once you get to 4 panels, we're going to put in the mission booklet like, oh, this building just starts destroyed, for instance. So in the mission booklet, we'll just put it there. It's just to help balance out, especially a lot of this. None of the summer maps start with destroyed buildings, so that's kind of a cool tool that we could use to, hey, look, if you have Train Pack 2, you get more use out of it. It's actually a fun and impactful use, where currently destroyed buildings are just line of sight blockers. They're not very interesting. They're kind of a dead hex. So, that's kind of why we want to explore that more.
It would also fix the capture points in buildings problem, where if
Yes.
you have VPs and capture points, VPs in buildings, and you destroy your opponent's one on the other side of the map, you give yourself a huge advantage.
Yeah, so
Because if
that
they can't
was
recapture it, then yeah.
right. So that was kind of a strategy that I thought would be cool, and it works out somewhat. Where you destroy a building, and it's like, oh, I can't capture it, so let me destroy it. It's like a cool concept, but arguably those games are kind of degenerative because if you had too many, that's kind of why there's not too many points in buildings. There's actually a couple reasons for that. One is really if you have over 2 buildings on an entire map, well, especially in 1v1s, this is more of a 1v1 thing, with resource capture points, then light vehicles, the tier 1 light vehicles become useless. So it's kind of a very fine line where, like, this map here, Moral River, doesn't have any, so light vehicles shine, except for they have the one issue that they can't cross this tank trap to kind of get that 6 victory point, if you will. So, like, going here, you can get the one on your side of the river, but the one on their side, that's why those are tank traps there who aren't aware. Basically, vehicles can't enter that hex. Graphically, it just has to be on this one because just to balance it. I did try to have it a little bit more asymmetrical, but it was just this part was a little bit better to be symmetrical in this part because there's a lot of other smaller asymmetries across the map that are actually fairly impactful, believe it or not. Like where the cover lines are, that actually matters. So there's that. I did actually have to tweak this later on. I think there's just again a lot of people anyone that helped play that watches video, just thank you. Just a lot of the feedback because like there's just even small things like there was a red line here that just it just wasn't balanced on both sides. So there's just very small little things that were causing small little balance issues where this map is kind of what I call the new gold standard. So these new maps really are elevated. Is light cover on destroyed buildings confirmed? Is not confirmed. It's confirmed to be in playtesting. I think it's very likely to make that part. It's very likely to make it in because I just don't see why not. Chris was initially resilient to it, but I'm anyone that play tests, but we won't do it in the tournament. But outside the tournament, anyone I ask to test that one, basically on the Discord, I kind of I always try to ask people. I don't want to. It's small enough where I probably should do a 2.04, but I can verbally tell someone the changes in like 2 minutes. Kind of what I already went over. Just those things to test. I think they're very likely to make it in. Taylor was kind of a person that kind of clarified early on in first edition that they were there. People were seeing that they were strong, but if it makes the game so much easier, kind of his point there, where he wants the game to be easy for new players. So like there's too many times where I saw someone move into a building and then I can't build an emplacement right next to it, but if I'm outside the building I can, even though that's on a different hex. My guy's, thematically moving over there and building it and then coming back to my hex. So that's actually
Yeah.
what I wanted on this map too. Uh, that I don't. It's just its problem is it doesn't compare with the factory buildings and the multi-hex bunker. But we did really want to offer buildings. I actually really wanted them for this map. So my idea for that is to have an alternate version of this map where you have destructible bridges, and then once they're destroyed, they're footbridges, so the infantry can still cross. So I think that'd be a cool alternate for this map, but we'll see if we can get it. It's obviously probably not likely, but it would be cool if we could maybe. You keep prodding Chris. Kind of the first Kickstarter, he kept going nuts there with adding stuff during the pledge manager. So if the backers keep prodding him, we can get it. So I don't know. I kind of I kind of still consider myself a backer. I'm pledging too. It's just like Chris is like, why are you pledging? But I still pledge, but because I kind of wanted to price out what I wanted. So
Yeah.
I mean that's pretty much I think it with the maps. And then I think that covers most of the design process, at least kind of from, semi-granular and semi-focused. It's a little bit of both aspect. But if you have any questions, let me know. I'll do a few more minutes here, and then we'll swing over, and I'll stop the stream, and then we won't really accept questions or because 5 minutes just not gonna happen. So we had that one question. Sorry, let's do that, then we'll end the stream. Unless there's more questions. So the factions, a little bit on the factions, kind of an intro to that, a little bit maybe on their play styles, and then we'll call it there. So US and Wehrmacht are very, very flexible factions. They essentially don't really have strong maps or weak maps, I would say. They're kind of solid on every map. There's not really any exceptions there. Their faction identity is kind of what makes them. It's kind of true on every map. So like US always has the firepower to kind of deal with whatever situation for a given cost. Like their costs are so low for their firepower. They don't really have health on their units, but their firepower is always like fantastic for the cost of the unit. They don't really have any exceptions to that rule. Maybe the only one is their mortar, right? So their mortar is probably the only exception, but the mortar is kind of the easiest one to use. So kind of talking about that, kind of zoom into it here. So their mortar is just the easiest mortar in the game to use because you can get a speed die and splash. So it's easy to use, but it's not like every other unit they have in their roster that's just bang for the buck in terms of damage output. It's just very easy to use. So it's kind of a great beginner mortar. I love always grabbing a mortar. Taylor, I think, never goes mortars. So you can touch on that if you want.
I mean, so I would suggest if you're new to US, I would suggest going 3 riflemen just because of some of the weaknesses that US has. Which I don't know if we're starting the conversation with US with the 5-minute video yet, but with mortars,
this is the untimed US overview.
There is some positive value with the mortar, and that's if you look at riflemen compared to all the other starting infantry, riflemen do not have really any utility beyond the wrench of building sandbags. Well, this mortar has the most utility for the cheapest upgrades compared to every other mortar in the game, but it lacks damage. So like 1 XP to get a splash upgrade, splash should be considered an extra range upgrade. It provides more range, it's going to provide more utility, it's going to provide more support, it's just not going to provide more damage. And then 2 munitions for a speed die, it doesn't get cheaper than that. It has the cheapest upgrades. If you're buying a mortar, you should buy those upgrades. But when it comes to new players, I strongly suggest having as few weapon teams as possible. I suggest the max 2, just so that way you don't accidentally get into a situation where you just have a bunch of weapon teams and no one that can actually go and capture a point.
Right.
And now you have
that's
to
the key focus.
Pack up, move this weapon team into the front line that only has 3 health, and somehow survive long enough to capture.
Yeah, I can't really disagree with any of his points there because what happens is, and I think this actually happened even in the grand finals of the tournament where Tassos, just like me, he likes to go in mortar. He was playing US throughout the entire tournament and we were casting those games. He goes in mortar, and then because there's only 2 rounds, he moved the mortar and then really ran into that in round 2 where you have a basically a rifleman still on his spawn line because he had 2 riflemen, and his mortar team was up at a capture point, and then what do you do with the mortar team? So like it's more natural, I think, for Wehrmacht because you can get the mortar team in tier 2 to get your, because an MG is a little bit more versatile. Mortar team, why I like the mortar team is because I usually go transports. So that's kind of my play style. So if you go mortar team, and then I know I don't have to move that unit. That's why I like it, but you have to plan that out in your head. And if you kind of just naturally with riflemen, you're way more threatening. Like there's the concept I'll call threat, where you always want to be able to threat to capture spots, and mortar team can't go in buildings. He's obviously only got 3 health. He can't even really fight unless he sets up. There's just a lot of issues with it. We briefly had Taylor for a while capturing with mortar teams and then retreating them. So there's that. Maybe you can do the Taylor strategy.
Yeah.
That is a
The
thing.
triple Soviet mortar opener back when they had a health upgrade. I would charge and take fire with capturing mortars, and then use a full retreat and set them up in the spawn line and have T-70s come up to support.
I had to say that had to go. It was just too weird. It was good. It was counterable. It was very. You had to know what was going on because it was so weird to see mortars go up and capture, retreat, and then it worked because again once you retreat, it's hard to get that unit to the front, but mortars didn't really have to get to the front. So kind of like I was kind of saying, that's kind of the issue with the U.S. mortar is you really have to know where you're putting them. You don't really want to put it as your key unit that has to push aside because you don't really want to do that with them. Although the speed die can help. So if you're going against something that's going to only do 1 damage to you, it might be worth it to capture and then retreat. But it's very hard to analyze that and understand that. But question: will it be possible to deploy all types of half tracks in the same game? So there was actually someone that inspired me from the Discord. And what I did with the Lost Brigades, the 251, so the Wehrmacht 251 half-track Lost Brigade card, that building extension, that now costs 2 XP instead of 1 XP. However, it can get either the Flame upgrade or the AT upgrade. So, yeah, you can have all 3 with that one. So, that's kind of cool. It kind of balances a little bit, too, because I think end of round 1, what I was trying to do with all the Tier 2 vehicles is have them available at end of round 1 for 1 XP. People really still avoid them. I think they're very impactful because you don't have to pay for tier 2 to unlock them. So I still argue that because you can get usually 2 of them at the end of round 1. So getting 2 vehicles out, tier 2 vehicles, I think is very strong. But yes, Fixer, to answer your question, Lost Brigade building extension if you grab that one. All right. So yeah, I mean, if there's any other... So, yeah, I guess, so I went over the U.S. and Wehrmacht. They don't really have strong maps or weak maps. So the key factions that typically have strong maps and weak maps are the other 3. So British have trouble with... Before this change, that's kind of why part of the reason why this change is going to be tested with the whole building emplacements while you're in a building and not being able to repair and all these things, is really that impacts British. It just makes British harder to play. Because British have a hard time especially with cathedrals. So like if I want to pop out the cathedral map, would probably be easiest to explain this. I'll turn on this for a second. Cathedral map's right here. So the cathedral map, I should probably press lock.
Yeah, cathedral and bunkers, kind of in a way, because they want to be in the bunker, so that way your opponent's not in the bunker.
Yeah.
But then you can't do anything while in the bunker. And same with the cathedral.
Right. So exactly what he's saying. Because the problem is because you want to be in the bunker, or so you want to be in the bunker, or you want to be in the cathedral, because they give you actually, the bunker gives you this cool armor-piercing die, which is very controversial. On the team. One member doesn't like it, but Bad Crow Games. But I thought it was really cool because it really makes it. The problem is just changing the health of the building doesn't feel that impactful. And in first edition, the bunker gave 3 defense dice, which was insane in first edition. It was absurd. It was just a nightmare to get someone out of a bunker. Now, because both of them have the 3 defense dice, both regular buildings and bunkers, it needed something else. So that's where the armor piercing, I think, is just really. Why I didn't go. That person did also want AI damage, like an MG bunker, kind of built in as the bunker, but we had that as a world builder pack tile, so that's kind of why it's like, oh, well, someone who has that tile in world builder pack, I didn't want to basically negate that tile, and I thought the AP damage is way more dynamic because a lot of units that go in bunkers don't have AP damage, so I just thought that was cool. But to touch on the British thing, in general, British have an issue with basically where they place their emplacements. And that's just how British are. You have to play British well, you have to know when and where to place the placements. There are a few strategies where you don't go in placements, but even those are advanced strategies. So British in general are just harder to play. But exactly the main point is once you go into Cathedral, you can't build an emplacement out, and then also emplacements have a hard time attacking into the Cathedral because there's like a line of sight block. It blocks line of sight, right? So if you build an emplacement here, the Cathedral blocks line of sight, so you can't attack up here. So if you put a Bofors here, it's very tough because you can't move, obviously, the Bofer. You can't move your emplacements once you build them. So it just becomes an issue where, there's a lot of hexes that you can't attack. So then, therefore, you just kind of have to build mortar teams because they have indirect fire and they can fire over the buildings. And building mortar teams like here is weird. I mean, you can do it. So generally, what I recommend for British players is to actually play the other side of the map. Because it's just a lot easier. Your emplacements are just a lot easier to use over here. So there's a lot more room for error over there. So British in general, because of that, I don't necessarily want to say weakness, but it is a weakness. It's just so much more difficult to use in placements in British with this Cathedral. The Cathedral is really cool. So I actually really like it's funny because British is my favorite faction, and I actually really love the Cathedral now. So why I say now is because first edition, how the rulebook was printed, there was these yellow lines, and there was this thing where if you were here, and I guess let's say out of the front, you couldn't attack this hex in first edition at rulebook as printed. So it was just very weird for me, for my mind to grasp. Oh, that two rule that because I normally can attack from 2 away, why can't I attack 2 into the building? We actually sometimes get people now who question, like in this double bunker over here, can I attack this hex from this bunker? And the answer is yes, because it is a multi-hex building. So, like, that's a key thing that now, yeah, so you could attack here, and this person can attack you, because it was actually one way. I think this person can attack out, but then this person can attack it. I'm like, that's got to go. That is way too confusing.
Yeah.
So it is just, it's so simple now. It's just whenever it crosses, it used to be 2 green lines, now they're going to be dark gray. Whenever it crosses 2 dark gray or purple lines, that'll block line of sight. So, like, you can't attack this, right? But you can attack someone here, and if you have 3 range, you can actually attack this person, right? Because center hex is center hex. It doesn't cross anything. You can attack it. So, yeah. So that's it for British. That's kind of the main thing with British. OKW, basically, they have a lot of complexity now. So a lot of balancing with OKW is kind of good to get this out of the way for those that actually watch that 5 minute, because we're not really going to be able to cover this really in that 5 minutes for OKW. But the OKW has a lot of hidden complexity, especially now with their tier buildings only having 3 health, 3 purple health, because they're in placements, even though they're tier buildings. So if you hear me say building, in that case they're in placements. I know, it's confusing. So you have to know where you're going to place them. And you have to really have a game plan almost round 1 what you're going to do. Especially, very often, people that don't have a plan just build them 1 hex forward. And that's fine. you could actually do just fine doing that, but that's not using OKW to the full potential of what their kit allows. So you can still win. I mean, so like the tournament winner there, um, he won with only going just barely out of his base with his tier building. So it's not like you lose if you don't take advantage of it, but it's best to really have a game plan. Like OKW, I kind of recommend the typical guideline is kind of what Taylor already pointed out. So like there's this like OKW tier 2 over here is not great. Like it may seem good because it's on the side of the map, it's fairly safe, but the problem is there's only one victory point over here. So there's just so much. So what you're gonna more likely kind of want to do is OKW tier 2 on this side and then tier 3 over here. You know, so there's a lot of more map reading, which I think map reading is probably the hardest skill in this game to learn to become like a top level player. Is you have to learn how to read maps and understand what you need to do on what side of the map. Given your faction, given your commanders, you know, you're just adding all these different variables that to become the best player, like, oh, you're saying, okay, victory points, I should just focus this side of the board. But if they're focusing hard and you can't counter what they're doing, then you're going to have to work over here. So there's just a lot of intricacies there. But that's kind of OKW's thing is you really have to know. And the other thing is, do you go Stuka or no Stuka? Because normally it's either Stuka, then you don't get tier 3, or you don't go Stuka and you get tier 3. So that's there's kind of those two big puzzles with OKW every single game. So maybe we could say that. Maybe that can make it the 5-minute thing. It's either Stuka or no Stuka. Because that's kind of the guideline. Because even with more fuel, Stukas cost 4 fuel in tier 2. So if you want to get 2 Stukas, like, you're definitely not likely to get a Panther out. Let's put it that way. Unless you get one from your commander.
My suggestion is going one tier 2 vehicle. You can get a Stuka and get to tier 3, but if the second you go 2 Stukas or a Stuka plus
Malugs.
What is that? Lukes? How you guys were pronouncing it in that 2v2 game?
Most Americans can't pronounce it. Let's just be fair.
Yeah. We'll just say the OKW's tier 2 heavy. If you go two tier 2 vehicles, you probably will have issues with fuel getting into tier 3 because OKW's tier 3 costs, or tier 3 vehicle units have incredibly high fuel also. You might be able to get Obo Soldaten, but you won't be able to get out that early Panther or the it's not the Brumball, it's the Storm Tiger.
Storm Tiger, yeah, and that's still fairly balanced because if you know what you're doing and you don't get a Stuka, you can rush your tier 3 supply truck across the board, set it up, and then get a Storm Tiger right in someone's face. So it's strong to do that. Where you might get that Storm Tiger out a turn later than other tanks or something, or 2 turns later. But even though it's slow, boom, it could be in the middle of the map. So that's kind of OKW. That's kind of why I say those two are the hardest. Soviets are a different nut to crack. All the Europeans.
I probably played the most Soviets. They don't have a lot of health or damage in their conscripts, but their conscripts are the most mobile. Like, if you go to this manpower right here with conscripts, you can take their double munitions, you can take their manpower, you have all these options. And so with Soviets, the issue is more knowing how far you can push the line.
So the word I say is threat. So to be a good Soviet player, you have to learn what this word means, because this is Soviets. They have they're so dynamic. They're still, I'd say they're moderate difficulty, because you have to understand this concept of what's threat, and that's kind of what Taylor's saying. So if you have a conscript here, because they have a speed die, they can move forward and around. So they can spend their 3 cubes and they get a speed die. So they can capture this, they can capture this, 1, 2, 3, 4. They can't get to this double victory point. But if you're on this double munition, like, oh my goodness, you could threaten all these. So that's why I say threat, because they're able to get it in that round. It comes back to that CP limitation where, units with speed dice can go further. So there's a big thing there. So map design, a lot of the maps designed with this had to be designed with Soviets in mind, because now in 2nd edition they get the speed die in their base form here, as I'll show you out of the gate. So in our Soviet discussion, we'll be talking about threat, because they have threat, and their big thing is their mortar team's not mobile, but they're kind of equivalent their version of a sniper. Basically, they don't have an MG in their base, but they have a sniper. Sniper is kind of a mobile weapon team, so that was balanced around having AI damage. Again, it's mobile. Yeah, I actually had a question from the Discord earlier today. Love these lopsided map, by the way. Not sure how this thing got up here, but in any case, the someone had a question like, "Oh, did Soviets lose their uniqueness because a lot of units have 3 range, and all infantry have 3 range now?" I say no, because having camo, having 3 sight and 3 range, all three of those things are almost equally important in to be a sniper. So it's very critical what they can do. And we had some discussion. There were some other ideas bounced around. But in the end, I said, no, snipers got to be good at damage. That's the cleanest, easiest thing to have. And we don't want them overlapping with MGs at all. MGs are more about pinning. So snipers have to have basically their mobility, being able to move around the board, and put basically damage threat. So that's kind of a different kind of threat in that they're good at damage threat, but they're usually horrible at capture things, and there's nothing over there that can get adjacent to them. So we'll get more into the Soviets, but the main thing that they have is they look bland, but they are far from bland. They play like U.S. and Wehrmacht play very close to each other in their core capabilities. It's just that U.S. have more firepower, Wehrmacht have stronger infantry. Basically, with the Panzergrenadier especially, they're just a little bit more diverse infantry. U.S. are just more about firepower. And then U.S. are more about their mobile weapon teams. Wehrmacht's all about their mobile vehicles, especially light vehicles. So that's kind of, well, I guess they're light vehicles because U.S. have mobile heavy vehicles. So it's it's yin and yang. A lot of things are like, okay, this has this, but the other one has this. So U.S. and Wehrmacht are kind of like the opposite sides of the same coin in a lot of ways. Whereas Soviets, they're so out there comparatively that they're not compared. Like you can't compare them as easily because they're conscripts. Basically, like, oh, why don't conscripts have reinforce? Or sorry, why doesn't Soviets have reinforce? Because the conscripts can just reinforce themselves for 2 munitions. So that is such a strong ability. Yes, they only start at 3 health, but they can go up to 5. So you can pick which one you're diving across the map to give 5 health, and it's a huge threat. And their scout car they can capture can get a defense die. So yeah, it doesn't get reinforced, but it's great on its own to capture points. And then the T-70 can also capture points, which is something I think I talked about with Taylor recently. So yeah, so what this is they can toggle. Basically, they can turn on a no fire die and they can leave it on from round to round, right? It doesn't switch automatically or turn off. So you leave it on no fire mode, and then if you have a Soviet tank, basically a T-70 somewhere over here, 1, 2, 3, you can move there and then capture it next round if you're already in no fire mode. So that's kind of really cool, just tool that T-70s do take a little bit more skill to understand how to use. They can also spot camo. They're very flexible. They're one of Soviets' more flexible units. I'd say the T-70 and the T-34 are their flexible units, and then everything else is kind of a specialist in a lot of ways. But even the 76mm AT gun, if you point that at an infantry and you have 4 AP, chances are it's going to roll some reds and you're going to do some damage. So, like, I know, like, people might shy away from that, but it is pretty solid to get out. So, I know, like, some people might skip it and everything, but 4 health, 5, yeah, it's 5 manpower, but that's the one thing that can knock out even the heaviest vehicles in the game. So, they just have a lot of cool uniqueness. And then I'd say it's funny, because I was the biggest critic of Heroic Sacrifice on OKW. And Chris was like, weren't you the biggest critic? Why did you have this on the T-34? So very late, we had to I wanted to really find a cool role for the T-34 because it was only 3 health and it's a frontline tank. And just thematically, even though like all of Heroic Sacrifice got pulled off of the OKW Tier 1 board, Heroic Sacrifice got on the T-34 because it was very thematic, right? Like Soviets would just send these out into the on the eastern front like crazy, and they were just trying to push the line. They lost how many of these, especially to the Stoogs. It's just insane. So like, how do we make this unique? We wanted all medium battle tanks basically to be the no-brainer. Basically, if you don't know what to go the T-34 Soviets, go your main medium battle tank on whatever faction you're playing, and chances are you're going to be able to do good with it. That's kind of the design in second edition that we really want to focus on. So it's more like the video game, right? The video game, you kind of just spam your medium battle tank if you don't have a specific plan. So that's kind of the idea here, where now you get heroic sacrifice, costs 2 XP, but you'll get 1 XP if it's lost back. So it almost like refunds itself. We had that 1 XP, that doesn't really work. It has to be 2. So 2 XP does make it more interesting. So it doesn't give victory points, so you can just mindlessly charge forward. But we didn't do the Soviet. I didn't do the Soviet overview with Slava yet, but I'll touch on more of that stuff in more detail. But suffice to say, that's the last thing I want to touch on before we do the 5 minutes, unless I don't see any other questions in chat. But Soviets are, they kind of have the biggest impact on map design out of all the factions. Because obviously if there's a cathedral, there's a cathedral. There's nothing I can do about it, right? Like, obviously the British, there is design considerations for British, but Soviets are that constant thing of, oh, this is 4 hexes away. That means a conscript can get there. Oh, this is 4 hexes away. Conscript can get there. So there's just that kind of question all over the place when designing maps. So if that's it, I'll give it 2 more minutes, and then we've been going pretty long, so we'll stop this one. Basically, you can just refresh the channel. I'm not even going to spam them out elsewhere. What we're going to do is I'm just going to stop the stream, basically take a breather, then we'll start it momentarily, and then we're going to start with USA, where I am going to basically read what's on the Kickstarter page, just to kind of like get you in the theme, because I think the Kickstarter page actually had this in some way, but then Taylor actually has a little bit different angle that I asked him to do, and then we're going to try to cover again the opening strategy you want to do with a faction, and then their strengths and their weaknesses, and we're going to really target 5 minutes. So that's the goal there. Hopefully those that are watching, like this kind of designer stream. Hopefully it touched a lot of notes that we weren't able to touch on in other streams. I will say, if you want to learn more about the Lost Brigades, like building extensions, that was in the solo, very kind of near the beginning of the solo. I went over a little bit over Fog of War. Then I touched on the Lost Brigade building extension. I was thinking about doing it here again, but why, I already have it on a video. So if you want to see that, that's in the solo co-op video. And that should be it. So thanks everyone. When does playtesting need to be finalized? No more changes afterward. I would say I would like to get it done within another 2 months, ideally. It really comes down to how quickly we can get to production, and the biggest thing is, like, the design's pretty much done. Like, I'm pretty happy with it. There are some minor changes. I guess I could touch on the minor changes. The Stewart, within this last week, went from 2 health up to 3. It was just kind of, it's a tough unit to balance. The U.S. Stewart from ECC, the Elite Commanders there. That was a tough unit to balance because you want it to be incentivized more than the Greyhound. But it had to be a cool roll where it's only got 1 AP, 1 AI, but double speed die. So it's kind of a cool little vehicle for the U.S. So going up from 2 to 3 to really encourage it with those commanders. And, but if you get the Lost Brigade extension for it. And then the other 3 factions are getting spots camo. That was just one thing that I know Taylor's kind of against. I'm partially against it too, is all factions having spot camo, because my argument has been and still is that spots camo isn't required. Players just need to play better, right? Like, that's it's just, it's really tough to say, but because like Wehrmacht has a Panzer Grenadier, that unit can spot camo, but just charging at it. So, like, that's how it plays out. That's what I would recommend. They
also have a bunch of light vehicles for speed die, and
right. They have light vehicles with speed dies, so easily move up to spot things. So, yeah. So the Wehrmacht's getting it on their Flakpanzer, their Ostwind there, their tier 3. I can just show that quick. So that's what's in testing now. I mean, these are, again, just That's it's just we'll see how that goes. So they got a little bit more of a buff. They weren't seeing too much use. I would like to see a little bit more Flock Panzer use. So their speed dive became core, and then now they got the upgrade to Spots Camo. That's their thing. OKW's tier 2 building actually Spots Camo now. That's kind of why I want that Spotlight truck now. I know it's not quite like the video game, but they had actually OKW had a light vehicle that could actually do that. So building that into the tier 2 so that you're actually more encouraged to push forward with it. And I think that'll help beginner players because it spots camo, it's a spotting, so it spots for the Stukas, spots for your Kettenwolfer, spots for your Volksgrenadier, spots for so many different units. So you can be a little bit more rewarded for pushing forward. And then British are getting it on their tier 3 Centaur. So they actually required a little bit more. They got a little bit more of a buff because they actually got the range upgrade there, and then this used to be a range and sight upgrade, but now it's just sight. So this is why the Flak Panzer is only 3 munition. It's one of the cheapest in the games for this upgrade. Oh, I guess OKW gets it for free, but only on that one tier 2 building. Excuse me. What the Centaur has to pay for, because it actually benefits it from it, right? So normally it only has 2 sight, but it actually can spot for itself. So that's why. And then that actually allowed this 2 AI upgrade to go back up from 2 XP to 3, just to balance out the fact that this guy's going to be really, really good at killing infantry. Just really good against when the enemy gets camouflage, So there's that. So hopefully that is it. Normally my videos kind of do this like chop thing at the end, so I'm just gonna ramble on for a minute here before I click stop streaming. So all of that is in. I don't know why when I click stop streaming it does that, but thanks everyone for joining us. If you don't stick with us, I don't blame you. This is gonna be, like I said, it's gonna be fast paced. We're just gonna click stop streaming. I'm gonna take like a minute break, come back, click start streaming, record the video, do a faction, stop streaming. So it's just gonna be 5 videos after this one. Um, just so that we could give links later on to a lot of people were just asking for a quick 5-minute overview of factions. So I've been overdoing Slava's channel. Slava's going to combine. We had the Wehrmacht one, some little technical issues early on. He's going to be splicing them together, and then we still have 2 left to go. Hopefully, we'll be able to finish before the end of the campaign. But it's not the biggest deal in the world because even those who are getting bundles, you don't have to pick. Like if you get the 4-player bundle, you don't have to pick you can't pick the other 2 factions until the pledge manager. So there's that. So again, thanks everyone for joining us. And this weekend, U.S. tournament, sign up. You get the all-in backer bundle. I was saying $599 value, but now that we signed a value to it, the $614 value, I was, like, as Chris said in that video, I wanted it to be 6 factions. For that price point, I said, look, we got to make this 6-faction bundle because a lot of people want to do the 3 versus 3. At this point, what can we do to make it happen? So I got that out of them. I was really excited for our backers because I think someone did a price comparison compared to first Kickstarter, and it's like, wow, this come on. So it's such an insane value, but you could win it. Dugo won it. Congrats to Dugo from the EU tournament. Sign up Saturday, 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Anyone can sign up. It's just that's the time. It's actually I was thinking noon, but I think 10 a.m. is just a little bit more flexible in case it runs long or whatever. It ran pretty solid. The EU tournament didn't have any issues, but I don't know how many signups we're going to have for this. Not too many so far, but we'll see. Maybe we can get. I know Taylor wanted to play, and we also had basically another referee, Attic. Adam wanted to play there. So hopefully we can get these guys to play because they've put a lot of work into this and they really enjoy the game. And it's kind of a to thank them because the tournaments are really fun.
Oh.
I like casting it. I'd like to play as well, but it's less stressful to cast. So, but Taylor, any final thoughts?
Well, I'm fine with referring it because like I played this game so much, I'd like to share it. Even though I think you were saying like, oh, if me or ADAC or some of the other like veteran playtesters went into the tournament, we would just win. But we're happy to do the refereeing because there's a lot that needs to go into it, and you kind of do want a referee that knows the rules. So if you're new to the game, don't feel like you shouldn't enter in the tournament because you're just going to be destroyed. In fact, I think Dugo had only played for I think about a week.
Yeah.
So,
He played a few
but
games. So.
he wasn't playing. He wasn't playing like the best that you could possibly play, but he played pretty well, and he did win. And well, I'm very excited to hopefully see something like that happen in the U.S. tournament. So
Yeah, he was like
feel free
he
to
was an
join,
underdog
get some
story. Yeah.
games. Yeah.
Yep. Please join. Please sign up. If not, again, we're thankful for all backers. This project really wouldn't be possible without each and every one of you. So again, thanks for everyone, and thanks for joining in. Even if you watch it later, if you have any questions, Discord, even if the Kickstarter is closed, Discord's probably the best. BGG, our Facebook page, whatever works for you. And if not, have fun on the battlefield. It's on TTS now. If you have Tabletop Simulator, as I have on my screen here, you could play it now. And it's just the easy format for playtesting. I'm not going to keep updating the P&P because a lot of people are like, oh, what changed? It's just like one change, and do I need it? And it's like, I hate to ask people to make one small change that might not even impact their games. So I was doing little like typo fixes and not putting them in the print and play because like they're just typos. Do you need the typo fix? No, you don't need the typo fix. So thanks everyone, and yep, next stream will be the tournament. Hopefully again on Slava's channel. If he can't make it, I'll do it, but he hasn't.